Homework, pigtails, teen and barely legal, and this content is often particularly violent. Videos also depict incest, such as sex between fathers and daughters and brothers and sisters, which are very prevalent. Child protection experts warn that this content, which is illegal offline, sexualises children and is driving demand for child sexual abuse material. Would the Secretary of State agree with me that we need urgent action following the pornography review to equalise online and offline content regulation in order to tackle violence against women and girls and shut down a gateway to paedophilic content?
Of course, I agree with her. There will be additional powers coming online via the Online Safety Act. I wish that those powers had come into force earlier. That was a legacy of the previous government. We have done everything we can to expedite those powers as quickly as we can. But from March and onwards, there will be powers that makes illegal extreme pornography illegal, requires sites to protect children from accessing pornography, child sexual abuse, and its related activity should not be called pornography. It is rape, and it should be called what it is, and we should do everything we can do to keep it offline.
Lauren Edwards.
Question number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As detailed in the AI Opportunities Action Plan, AI growth zones will help secure UK's position as a global leader in AI, ensuring benefits are felt across the whole of the UK. And my honourable friend will be pleased to hear that on Monday we invited local and regional authorities, along with industry, to come forward with potential suitable sites for hosting AI infrastructure.
Thank the Minister for her response. Rochester and Stroud is well placed to help drive the UK's AI economy. Positioned between London and mainland Europe, we have several net zero energy projects ready to go, with further plans for a data centre and battery storage, a council that is already using AI and which created an AI accelerator programme to support local businesses, and 3 university campuses that are driving innovation. So will the Minister meet with me to discuss my constituency's potential as a future AI growth zone?
Can I thank the member for strongly advocating for her constituency of Medway to potentially become an AI growth zone. And she will well know that the AI Opportunity Action Plan outlines steps we are taking so that UK can build the cutting-edge computer infrastructure needed to lead in AI development and deployment. And I eagerly look forward to reading the expressions of interest from members' constituency. And of course, I'll be more than happy to meet with her to discuss this in detail.
Jeremy Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be well aware that the growth of AI across the country depends on the ready supply of data and other content on which the models can be trained. She'll also recognise that much of that content comes from our creative industries, and she will know that our creative industries are profoundly troubled that they are not properly treated by the companies that are currently scraping that data without their permission or without proper compensation. I know the government will want to resolve that, and she will know that the data bill has had amendments added to it in the other place to address this. Does she intend that the government will resolve this by means of the data bill or by other means? If other means, what other means and when?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The right honourable member will know that there is ongoing consultation to look at clarifying the issues that covers both copyright and AI. And there will be a statement, as you know, this afternoon on the data bill, which will cover this issue in more detail. As you will also know, the consultation ends on the 25th of February, after which we'll be reviewing the responses to see what we need to do.
We come to topicals. Patrick Hurley.
Topical number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thursday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to embracing AI, Britain is leading the world. I have just got back from the Paris AI Action Summit. The companies I met there were genuinely excited about our AI Opportunities Action Plan. They were also optimistic about how we're using AI to build a smaller, smarter state. The new government digital service I launched last month will harness the power of technology to deliver efficient, convenient public services designed to work for working people.
Curley.
In recent months, it's become obvious that some social media companies' algorithms are not being run in the pursuit of a commercial imperative, but rather in the service of the political interests of their host country. Can I ask the Minister if such politicised social media firms can be treated as such with a view to protecting the national interest?
I'm grateful for his question, but I'm also grateful for the leadership that he's shown in his community in Southport during extremely difficult times. The Online Safety Act applies to all people, all users, and that includes measures and in existing legislation to tackle misinformation peddled by foreign states. But he has a very specific challenge with his community. I'm willing to meet with him if he would like, and if he'd like to bring members of his own community to express to me directly the impact these issues have had on him and his community, I would be very willing to take that meeting.
Secretary of State Alan Back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives secured a £450 million investment from AstraZeneca to expand their Merseyside vaccine factory. When the Chancellor wrecked the deal, AstraZeneca tried to save it by increasing that investment to over £500 million. So why did Labour still walk away, handing jobs and investment to our competitors?
The honourable gentleman says that they secured a deal. Well, the deal was announced in March. The general election was in July. Where was the deal? Where was the funding for it? Where was the written agreement? There was nothing.
Alan Back.
Mr. Speaker, when Labour negotiates, Britain loses. AstraZeneca are investing over £4 billion in Singapore, the US and Canada. They could have invested in our country too. What is Labour doing now to bring back the deal they destroyed?
There was a deal by WhatsApp that was never followed up by the Treasury, never followed up by ministers, no meetings between AstraZeneca and their government. Their government lets Britain down every time, which is why the country turned to Labour, and Labour is delivering.
Mr. Speaker, the Payment Systems Regulator found that more than half of bank transfer scams recorded in 2023 originated on Facebook, Instagram or WhatsApp. What progress has the Secretary of State made in making sure that tech companies are held to account for fraud originating on their platforms?
He makes a very good point. It's one of the things that we specifically need to look at later when we move forward with the data bill in committee. Perhaps he'll be sitting on the bill committee. Who knows?
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has just held talks for a UK-EU defence and security partnership, of which the development of artificial intelligence will have been a key theme. However, last night the UK chose not to join with EU countries in signing the international agreement on AI. So can the Secretary of State please explain this dissonance in the government's approach?
At the Paris summit, let me congratulate firstly President Macron for laying on an incredible summit that brought together governments, tech companies and investors, and Britain's voice was heard loud and clear, which is why we're delivering such extraordinary investment into this country. Most of the aspects that were negotiated, the Labour government signed up to and was fully engaged in. In a few areas, we will put Britain's interest first, and a couple of other countries didn't sign to. I don't hear him criticising them.
Just Athwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Ilford, we worked with Queen Mary University to launch a new satellite campus in Ilford to teach medicine and dentistry. Given the growing importance of education in STEM fields, what specific steps is the Secretary of State taking to increase educational opportunities in this area and in London and across the country?
I'm grateful for his question. The government is working to develop a world-leading science and technology skills base that will drive economic growth and opportunity for all. We're committed to expanding the access and participation in science and technology education, and we're partnering with universities to build the skills and workforce across the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A month ago, the Prime Minister said that countries will either be AI makers or AI takers. Does the Minister agree that, given that the Prime Minister didn't attend the AI Safety Summit, but he's given a clear indication that the UK will be an AI taker?
This Prime Minister has delivered the AI Opportunities Action Plan. This Prime Minister is deploying AI technology and productivity tools across government itself. This Prime Minister has brought in £30 billion in investment into digital AI infrastructure since he became Prime Minister. And at the same time, this Prime Minister is sorting out the mess left after 14 years of Tory rule.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Imran Hussain.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we progressed our Borders Bill to deliver counter-terrorism-style powers to bring vile criminal smuggling gangs to justice. We also announced a further £350 million to get Britain building and deliver 1.5 million new homes our country desperately needs, including more affordable homes. We've slashed red tape that holds businesses and working people back, creating 10,000 more apprentices. This morning I have meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was proud to have played my part in helping draft what has now become the Employment Rights Bill. A new poll shows 3/4 of the British public back the stronger rights for workers in the bill, including better sick pay. Yet that lot over there, the Tories and Reform, disgracefully voted against it. In fact, the Leader of the Opposition doesn't even believe in maternity pay or the living wage. Mr. Speaker, our statutory sick pay is ranked one of the lowest in Europe. It needs to be brought in line with the living wage. So will the Prime Minister back my campaign to strengthen this bill further so sick pay is at the level that finally stops punishing workers for being sick?
Mr. Speaker, our plan for change delivers the biggest upgrade in workers' rights in a generation to our Employment Rights Bill. Ending exploitative zero-hour contracts, ending the scandal of fire and rehire, extending statutory sick pay to 1.3 million employees. Of course, that's on top of the pay rise for 3 million of the lowest paid. I would have thought the Leader of the Opposition might actually sort of support day one protection employment rights, given where she's going, but she thinks maternity leave is excessive. Our plan is pro-worker and pro-growth.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government established the Ukraine Family Scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question was taken under the last government, according to the legal framework of the last government. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. It should be Parliament that makes the rules on immigration. It should be the government that makes the policy. That is the principle, and the Home Secretary is already looking at the legal loophole which we need to close in this particular case.
Mr. Speaker, he did not answer the question. If he plans to appeal, then the appeal may be unsuccessful and the law will need to be changed. And if he does not appeal, the law definitely will need to be changed. He talks about a decision made under the last government. It was not made by the last government, it was made by the courts. The issue we are discussing today is about judicial decisions. We cannot be in a situation where we allow enormous numbers of people to exploit our laws in this way. There are millions of people all around the world in terrible situations. We cannot help them all, and we certainly cannot bring them all here. Will he commit to bringing forward that new legislation or amending his Borders Bill?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already said the Home Secretary has already got a team working on closing this loophole. We don't need to wait for that. We're getting on with that because we're taking control. They lost control of immigration. We had nearly 1 million people come into this country, had an open borders experiment. On a Monday of this week, they voted against increased powers to deal with those that are running the vile trade of people smuggling. Same old Tories, open borders, empty promises.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister was on top of his brief, perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8. I'm not talking about what he just said. I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interest before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law?
She complains about scripted answers and questions. Her script doesn't allow her to listen to the answer.
Prime Minister.
She asked me if we're going to change the law and close the loophole in question 1. I said yes. She asked me again in question 2, and I said yes. She asked me again in question 3. It's still yes.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't listen to question 1. I asked if he would appeal the decision. He did not answer that. He's not listening. He's too busy defending the international human rights law framework. Mr. Speaker, this case has arisen because a Palestinian came to the UK from Gaza in 2007. He is now a British citizen. This is precisely why we need to break the conveyor belt from arriving in the UK to acquiring indefinite leave to remain and then a British passport and now a right to bring 6 family members here as well. Just last week, the Prime Minister bizarrely claimed that a British passport was not a pull factor for those coming to the UK. Will he now support our plans to toughen the process on indefinite leave to remain and make getting a British passport a privilege, not a right?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, they presided over record high levels of immigration. Reached nearly 1 million. It was a one-nation experiment in open borders. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one campaigning for more people to come and thanking her own side when they supported her campaign. So before she lectures us, I think she needs to reflect on her own record here.
Mr. Speaker, he is the Prime Minister now. The people out there want to know what he is going to do about the situation. He needs to spend less time whining about the last government and do his job. I thought, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister and I both agreed that Israel had a right to defend herself. Yet the judge in this case noted that the family were facing a humanitarian crisis, and I quote, as a consequence of the Israeli government's indiscriminate attempts to eliminate Hamas, and government lawyers accepted this. Is the Prime Minister allowing lawyers to change the position on Israel? And was this because of advice from the Attorney General? And if not, why on earth did government lawyers accept the argument that Israeli actions were indiscriminate?
Prime Minister.
They put the complete opposite argument. She talks about on top of her brief. She has no idea what she's talking about. I'll tell her again. We need to change the law. That's why the Home Secretary is already closing the gap. I know the script doesn't allow any adaptation, but this is getting tedious.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has not read the judgment. I suggest that he does. There are very serious questions now. Being asked about the Attorney General, the Prime Minister's personal friend and donor. Even Labour ministers are concerned. One Labour peer, Lord Glassman, has called him the absolute archetype of an arrogant progressive fool. If we are serious about protecting our borders, we need to make sure we appoint people who believe in our country and everything we stand for. It is not clear the Attorney General does. The government is now recruiting a new Chief Inspector of Borders who lives in Finland and wants to work from home. This is not serious. Why should the British public put up with this?
The individual in question was appointed in 2019 by the last government to a senior position. He then worked for 5 years from Finland. We've changed that, and he's now going to be working from the United Kingdom full-time. Finland under them. And she talks about the Attorney General. She sat round the cabinet table with an attorney who was later sacked for breaching national security.
Charlotte Littles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Long-standing traders in the CPS Centre in Colchester were devastated to receive eviction notices, giving them just 28 days to vacate, entirely out of the blue and under spurious pretexts by the new owner, shell company Shivat Hananim Capital. So far, the owner and their legal representatives have failed to hear tenants' concerns and mine and to negotiate a way forward. So does the Prime Minister share my concerns at this situation, and will he set out our plans to protect independent businesses which are at the heart of our high street and communities?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Well, thank her for raising this, which is obviously of real concern to businesses in her constituency. We do, Mr. Speaker, expect landlords to meet their obligations to make buildings safe, and we support robust enforcement action from the regulators if they fail to do so. I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the Minister to discuss what steps can be taken in the particular case to support the businesses that her constituents rely on.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 80 years ago this week, the Allies began a pincer movement against German forces between the Ruhr and the Rhine. British and Canadian troops attacked from the north, Americans from the south. British, Canadian and American soldiers fighting shoulder to defeat fascists. 80 years on, President Trump seems to have forgotten all this. His tariffs against steel and aluminium will hit Canada the hardest and will also hit jobs and the cost of living in our country. So in reminding President Trump who America's true and long-standing friends and allies really are, will the Prime Minister also prepare a plan for tariffs in return, starting with tariffs on American electric cars?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's right to reference our history in the 80-year anniversary. And of course, we were fighting alongside the Americans, and that is amongst the reasons we have a special relationship. British steel is an essential part of our heartlands, and we will not abandon our skilled workforce. And it needs a level-headed assessment of the implications, which is what we're going through at the moment. But we will always put our national interest first and steelworkers first.
Sir Ed Davey.
Thank the Prime Minister for that reply. But it seems to me the way President Trump and his ally Musk are operating, they do need to hear strong measures and words from even their allies. And moving on to Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, if Ukraine is forced to surrender its own sovereign territory to Russia, it will be the greatest betrayal of a European ally since Poland in 1945. But President Trump says Ukraine may end up Russian, and he wants American money back. I think we all fear where this could end and the dangerous implications for our defence and our security. So can the Prime Minister reassure this House that he and other European leaders have given sufficient support to President Zelensky so that he can't be bullied by Trump and Putin into accepting a deal that will effectively hand victory to Russia?
Prime Minister.
As he knows, I met President Zelensky in Kyiv just a few weeks ago. It was my 8th meeting, the position since the outbreak of this conflict has been a united position across the House of supporting Ukraine, and I was able to reiterate my position, which is we must put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. That matters now just as much as it mattered at the beginning of this conflict, the strongest possible position, and I did discuss with him what more we can do, what more our allies can do to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position.
Kim Ledbeach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, from the benches opposite, I published my Healthy Britain report, recommending a cross-departmental approach to improving health and wellbeing. Now that we're in government, I'm delighted that ministers have hit the ground running, because running is obviously very healthy for you. So will the Prime Minister confirm that last week's announcement of an increase to the public health grants, which will help local services focus more on prevention and early intervention, is just the start of a long-term strategy that will make Britain healthier, happier and more productive, reduce pressure on the NHS and promote growth?
Well, I thank her for highlighting the important role that local communities play in supporting healthy lifestyles. I'm delighted, Mr. Speaker, we're providing almost £4 billion for the local health services that people rely on, and that's things like health visitors, stop smoking services and drug abuse treatments. I'll make sure that she meets the relevant minister to discuss.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, I get it. Nobody wants to get into a trade war. But, you know, unlike Peter Mandelson, sometimes you've got to stand up for what you believe in. My friends here in the DUP have learnt nothing from their mistake of backing Brexit and think that tariffs are a laughing matter. No. But would you agree with me that actually we need to stand up for ourselves, we need to back our workers, we need to back our businesses, not just in Lagan Valley, but indeed across the UK?
Yeah. Well, yes, of course. The US and the UK share a strong and balanced trading relationship. We invest hugely in each other's economies, and we will continue to work closely with President Trump to boost growth and to create jobs. And I reassure her we will always act in the best interests of businesses and working people across the whole of the United Kingdom, including, of course, Northern Ireland.
Gill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was baffled on Monday that, given the chance to support legislation backed by the National Crime Agency to crack down on criminal smuggler gangs and secure our borders, the parties opposite, the Conservatives and Reform, linked arms in the voting lobby to vote against it. The Conservatives spent 3 years and £700 million on their ludicrous Rwanda scheme and saw 4 volunteers returned. Does the Prime Minister agree with me? There is only one party that is serious about repairing our broken immigration system.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and let me remind them what they voted against earlier this week in our Borders Bill. They voted against, that's Reform and the Tories, they voted against making it an offence to organise the buying, selling and transport of small boats, against making it an offence to endanger lives at sea, against and powers to arrest suspected people smugglers before the smuggling takes place. They voted against. They voted for open borders, both of them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister gave yet another threadbare excuse for why he and his North London lawyer friends are giving away the Chagos Islands. Mr. Speaker, this is his decision, and he must own it. More importantly, he can't tell us, the British taxpayer, how much this is going to cost. Is it £9 billion? Is it £18 billion? Is it £52 billion? The Times have called this botched deal insane. Members of his own cabinet reportedly think it's impossible to understand. And one of his own MPs think it's the worst thing the Labour Party have ever done. So can the Prime Minister tell us which word he thinks best describes this deal?
Mr. Speaker, I set out the position in relation to Chagos Islands last week. I also offered the Leader of the Opposition a briefing on this, a high-level briefing. She still hasn't taken me up on that briefing. They're asking questions without wanting to know the facts. It's extraordinary. Mr. Speaker, someone who wants to be Prime Minister does not want to know the facts, even when she's offered a high-level briefing. He'd be better informed if she took me up on the offer of a briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will, I'm sure, want to congratulate Newcastle United on reaching the League Cup final after Arsenal's exit. But will he also, in what is National Apprentice Week, will he also congratulate the 600 apprentices learning trades from welding to quantity surveying as part of the Tyne Bridge restoration programme? And whilst I know he can't confirm bridging the funding gap left by the Tories, will he confirm that he is looking forward to seeing the Tyne Bridge restored in time for its 100th birthday in 2028?
Well, look, I'm going to struggle to sound delighted with the results of that particular football match, but look, it will be a special day for Newcastle fans. But the Tyne Bridge is an iconic North East landmark, and I congratulate the apprentices who are helping to restore this vital piece of infrastructure. As usual, the Tories made empty promises that they had no intention of keeping, including £2.9 billion worth of transport commitments that were never funded. We will look at the capital projects around the spending review and let her know as soon as we can.
Liz Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents, Peter and Maureen, have been married for 70 years. Peter is 93, and for the past few weeks he has been stuck on a hospital ward, waiting to go home because a care package hasn't been arranged. Peter is missing home and missing Maureen. So will the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that the social care crisis will be tackled this year?
Well, can I thank her for raising this issue and the particular case of her constituents? And I also need to know this is deeply personal to her, and if I may, I extend my deepest sympathies to her and her family for their loss. We have taken immediate action on social care, already delivered £3.7 billion of additional investment, working on the first ever fair pay agreement for the sector, and of course boosting the carers allowance. I invite her and everybody to work with the House on the longer term reform that we need. Thank you.
Julie Mims.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. James Rennie is an outstanding specialist school in the heart of my Carlisle constituency. Having converted every spare corner into classrooms, exceeded its published admissions numbers, and already having 43 applications known for this September, it is literally bursting at the seams. It cannot expand any further, and what is clearly needed is a new specialist school for North Cumbria. What assurances can the Prime Minister give my constituents that his government will put children before ideology and allow local authorities to tackle the shortage in SEN provision?
Well, I thank her for raising this vital issue. It's not the first time it's come up. We are supporting mainstream schools to increase SEND expertise whilst also establishing dedicated SEN units. Because we need to make sure that special schools also can cater for those with the most complex needs. So we're working on this. It's come up time and again, but we are doing that vital initial steps.
Anna Sabine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dorothy House is an amazing hospice that supports terminally ill people in Frumeney, Somerset and their families, including my good friend Lisa. Next year, Dorothy House will be looking forward to celebrating 50 years of service, but they will also be facing an additional cost of £422,000 thanks to increases in employers' national insurance. Will the Prime Minister commit to meeting with me and representatives of the hospice sector to hear first-hand the impact of NICs and to work with them to find a solution?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everyone deserves high quality and compassionate end-of-life care. The honourable member knows we inherited a £22 billion black hole in our public finances. That's why we took the difficult but right decisions to invest in our public services. I do recognise the pressure that hospices are facing, and that's why we invested £100 million into hospitals, with an additional £26 million to support children and young people's hospices. And I will make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
John Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A significant part of the dreadful legacy left by the previous Conservative government is a chronic underfunding of transport infrastructure, especially in the North East, as we've just heard from my honourable friend. So does the Prime Minister agree with me and the North East Mayor Kim McGuinness that redevelopment of the Leam sideline, the disused Leam sideline, that would reconnect Gateshead with North Durham North, and increasing the capacity on the East Coast Main Line would help bring the metro to Washington in my constituency, and would bring much needed jobs, growth and opportunities to my region?
Well, I thank her, and both she and the North East Mayor are dedicated campaigners on this issue. The party opposite left us a host of unfunded promises, and public transport is in dire condition. Expanding the metro network has huge potential to drive growth and unlock new housing. I'm pleased that progress is being made on the business case.
Second Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, we learned that the Prime Minister's close friend, the Attorney General, has in the past advised Caribbean nations on seeking trillions of pounds in reparations. He's been a key player in the surrender of the Chagos Islands and the related fiasco there, which will cost the taxpayers up to £18 billion, and has even advised Jerry Adams, who is standing in line to get compensation from the British government in Northern Ireland legacy payments, the quantum of which could cost up to £2.7 billion. Given the Attorney General's track record, does the Prime Minister have faith in his motives, and does he have confidence that his best friend represents good value for the British taxpayer?
Mr. Speaker, we've long had the principle that everybody's entitled to legal representation in this country. That means that lawyers don't necessarily agree with their client. Now, the Conservative Party used to believe in that principle. If they now disagree with that principle, they should go and see the victims of very serious crime, including sexual crime, and tell them that under their provisions, the lawyer who disagreed with the perpetrator wouldn't be able to represent them, meaning that victims will be cross-examined by perpetrators because lawyers disagree with the perpetrator. That's never been the Conservative Party position. If it is now, they should say so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allergy School, launched just this week by the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation, is a free programme to support children with food allergies. Allergic disease is a growing issue in this country, with over 20 million people in the UK being affected. For this reason, it has never been more important for us to have a national allergy strategy and an allergy czar to drive and coordinate that action. Will the Prime Minister join me in welcoming this programme, and will he meet with me and the Foundation to talk about how we can work together to drive this issue forward?
Well, I thank you for raising this really important issue, because hospital admissions for allergies have risen sharply, particularly in the last 2 decades. I do welcome the work being carried out by the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation. We will respond to the recommendations of the National Allergy Strategy Group in due course, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Oxfordshire constituency of Didcot and Wantage has seen a 35% population increase in the last 20 years. My constituents recognise the need for affordable housing, but the current planning system isn't delivering the GP surgeries, dentists and transport options that they need. Will the Prime Minister restore faith in the planning system and, as well as focusing on housing numbers, deliver the local targets for health services and wider infrastructure that growing communities need?
Well, thank you for his question. We are, of course, delivering the 1.5 million homes, but we're creating communities as well for the future, and so he's right that that must include good schools, GPs and reliable transport links. That's what makes a good community. And just today, Mr. Speaker, we announced an additional £350 million to deliver more affordable homes so more people can realise the dream of home ownership.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is National Apprenticeship Week.
As co-chair of the APPG for Apprenticeships, I can tell the Prime Minister that employers are very pleased to see the announcements this week that will make a real difference both in terms of the completion rate and the flexibility around apprenticeships. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that schools should be promoting apprenticeship alongside A-levels and other options? And can he tell us what more he's going to do to support more young people to get into an apprenticeship?
I'm very pleased that he's raised this issue and that we'll be able to give employers more flexibility over maths and English requirements. This is really important, Mr. Speaker. There are very many young people who didn't get the maths qualification they wanted at the time, but are very well suited for the future, want to play their part, and now they can get apprenticeships under the changes that we've made. And that's 10,000 extra apprenticeships. This is delivering for them, giving them a chance for the future to contributing, of course, to our economy.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Farming Minister told a conference of farmers that farming is not high in the pecking order for this government. Given the heartless family farm tax, is his minister correct? Yes or no?
Farming's top of the agenda as far as I'm concerned. That's why we put £5 billion to support farmers in the budget. They failed to spend £300 million on their watch on farming, and we set out our roadmap, which has been welcomed by the NFU, as she very well knows. It was described as long overdue. I wonder who didn't do it before.
Mr. Jewess, I'm sure you don't want to be leaving today. It's not the best day. Right. Natasha Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a graduate of the Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra, the Prime Minister will know that youth services can broaden a young person's horizons beyond what they could ever imagine. But with national spending on youth services seeing a 73% decline since 2010, can the Prime Minister outline how this government will bring youth services back into our communities? Will he look at giving them the statutory protections they deserve? And will he visit Croydon East to see firsthand the vital role these services play in my constituency?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my days in the Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra were a long time ago now. But we do fully recognise the importance of youth services to help young people save lives and live safe and healthy lives. We've been developing our plans for the new National Youth Strategy to bring power back to young people and help every young person realise their potential.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Every 22 minutes, a child in this country loses a parent or a loved one. That's 40,000 children every year facing a trauma which many of us here know can last a lifetime. Charities such as Winston's Wish do a fantastic job of providing support for young people, particularly when schools are closed or there's no one else to turn to. But at the moment, there's no simple way of the children knowing where the charities are or the charities being able to contact the children. So will the government back my private member's bill this summer to do just that? And would the Prime Minister meet me to discuss how we make sure that another generation of children does not have to face this trauma?
Well, can I thank her for her ongoing work and campaign on this important issue. The Cross-Government Bereavement Group continues to look at how we can improve access to the support that children and young people need at these difficult times. And of course I'll make sure that she gets the meeting that she wants with the Minister to discuss this further.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday marks the 20th anniversary of the launch of the Make Poverty History campaign, and a fantastic speech for all of us that were there, delivered by the late, great Mandiba. That campaign inspired a generation of campaigners and a great Labour government to deliver unprecedented action to tackle global poverty, lifting millions out of poverty. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to some of those campaigners and commit to doing all he can to ensure that Britain is playing its full part in helping eradicate global poverty today?
It's a really important issue. We do pay tribute, and of course we continue to play our full part.
Alex Bloor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Basingstoke Hospital, used by half of my constituency of North East Hampshire, has had its rebuild delayed by 15 years, despite no ministerial visit to see the worsening conditions there. The cost of maintaining the hospital for those 15 years is estimated to be almost as much as the rebuild itself. So can the Prime Minister explain the logic of making taxpayers pay twice?
Mr. Speaker, her Constituents are right to be frustrated about the empty, unfunded promises that were left behind by the Conservatives, a point made by her and, of course, by the Labour MP for Basingstoke. Under the previous government's plan, a new hospital in Basingstoke would simply not have been delivered because it was unfunded. It was a promise without anything behind it. We've put in place a funded deliverable plan which will see the hospital built, and we'll work closely with the Trust to ensure that it is.
Dr Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government's devolution plans are a welcome progressive development to shift power and resources from Whitehall to our communities. But there are, of course, discussions now around the process and realisation of benefits for our communities. So can the Prime Minister assure my residents in Worthing West, and indeed all constituencies starting priority devolution programmes, that Sussex devolution will give us meaningful control over our local priorities, including housing, transport and social care?
Minister.
Well, I thank her for raising devolution, which will see her constituents in Sussex get meaningful control over local priorities. The devolution priority programme, Mr Speaker, will see a wave of mayors elected next year, including in Sussex, and I believe that those with skin in the game make the best decisions about their communities.
Final question, Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister will be well aware of the Global Vaccination Fund, Gavi, one of the United Kingdom's great success stories. It's vaccinated from deadly diseases over 1 billion children under 5. It presents real value for money to British taxpayers, and over 80% of our constituents support it. Will he give the House today an undertaking that Britain will continue this leadership and make a decisive pledge at next month's replenishment conference?
Well, I'm grateful that this is a really important issue. As he rightly points out, I've long supported it and will continue to support and share details with him just as soon as I can. But it is important, have supported it, will continue to do so. Thank you.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions. Can people leave the chamber quickly and quietly? We're now coming to the urgent question. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero if he will make a statement on the potential security implications of the involvement of Chinese companies, including Mingyan, in energy infrastructure projects.
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for bringing this question to the House. The protection and security of the energy sector is an absolute priority for this government. We have a range of effective measures in place which give the government powers to balance an open investment environment to facilitate growth with protecting the areas of our economy that are most sensitive to national security. The government firmly believes that the biggest risk to our energy system and our energy security is remaining dependent on international fossil fuel markets controlled by petrostates and dictators. And that's why we have a mission to make Britain a clean energy superpower to end that dependence. We have a world-leading offshore wind industry here in the UK, and international investment plays a crucial role in supporting jobs across the country. And as part of this mission, my department engaged in discussions with a wide range of investors, including those from other countries. We're also clear that alongside this, growth of UK supply chains is absolutely critical, and that's why we've set out plans for a clean industry bonus to drive investment in manufacturing, as well as setting up GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund. The government will not hesitate to use our powers to protect national security whenever we identify concerns, and the government will take a consistent long-term and strategic approach to managing the UK's relations with China, rooted in UK and global interests. The government will cooperate with China where it can, compete where it needs to, and challenge where it must.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and I thank the Minister for her comments and general reassurances, but there are specific concerns at the moment. China can produce what is useful for us for the development of renewables, particularly in the North Sea, and we can benefit from these investments. China also needs access to our markets, but there are security issues involving companies involved in offshore renewable developments, which have become apparent in recent weeks and been raised numerous times. It has been reported that the Chinese company Mingyang is interested in producing turbines for a new project in the North Sea. And there's already around 60 million of Scottish Government funding, which has been earmarked for a wind turbine factory near Inverness, in addition to a potential 27 million for Orient Cable to provide subsea cables for island communities. This is despite antitrust cases against China from the European Union and the fact that the Norwegian government blocked Mingyang from its green infrastructure projects. So can the Minister reassure the House that the Department will be following the same rigorous processes to assess these risks as the previous government did, which ultimately blocked Huawei from the 5G network? And this must include an assessment of any opportunities for remote access to the turbines, as the software will normally remain in control of the manufacturers even once commissioned, which would leave them vulnerable to being switched off. We need local control. And will the Department reassure the House that there are discussions ongoing with the Scottish Government to ensure that no public money is invested before this risk assessment has taken place? And how will they work with the Scottish Government and Cabinet colleagues to ensure offshore and undersea infrastructure is safe?
Thank you. The honourable member raises some really important concerns, and they're concerns that we're very much alive to. As I said in my first answer, energy security is absolutely critical to the work of DESNZ, and that's why we have the Clean Power Mission, to end our dependency on fossil fuels. International investment is a crucial part of that and helps to support growth and jobs across the country. And as part of that, we have discussions with a wide range, variety of international investors. But we do absolutely recognise this needs to be balanced against national security implications. And that is something that we work on constantly across government with input from a number of departments. And I'm pleased to see my honourable friend, the Minister for Security from the Home Office, here today for this UQ. The government has to consider both those aspects together, the need for investment, the need for greater capacity in our supply chains, but also that security risk. And while I can't get into details of the individual case, given the nature of the discussions that are ongoing, I would reassure the honourable member that we are taking these factors into account. We do want to make sure that the most robust processes are followed as we look at the details of this particular incident.
Chair of the Select Committee, Bill Esterson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I say how pleased I am to hear the Minister confirming the importance of our energy security in contrast to what we saw under the previous government. And they can groan all they want, but that is the reality of what was inherited in July last year. But as we extend energy infrastructure in this country, can she confirm how this government will ensure that we have control of the operation of that infrastructure? And does she also agree that it is vitally important that through the industrial strategy we see the renaissance in our manufacturing and greater resilience in our supply chain, all of which adds to the energy security of this country?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. He's absolutely right that as part of getting this investment into infrastructure, dealing with capacity issues in our supply chain is absolutely crucial. It's one of the reasons why through the National Wealth Fund we invested in lithium in Cornwall last week. So in terms of a critical minerals strategy, we want to maximise the natural resources that we've got where we can. As I said, we want to make absolutely sure that security concerns are addressed as well when we look at which investors do invest in our new economy.
Sheriff Secretary of State Andrew Bob.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the indication that Mingyang will get the green light from the Treasury to supply wind turbine technology to the Greenvolt wind farm in the North Sea is concerning. Indeed, alarm bells have been sounded by officials in the Minister's own department and indeed in the Ministry of Defence. This green revolution will come with a Made in China label. The government, in collusion indeed with the SNP in Holyrood, are determined to see Chinese companies reap the economic reward. Her party says again and again that transition to renewable energy will reduce our reliance on hostile regimes. Chinese-controlled technology embedded in our critical energy infrastructure is evidently a threat to our security. Can the Minister assure us that she is taking this threat seriously? And can the Honourable Lady explain how using wind turbines made by Mingyang reduces our reliance on foreign states? Mr. Speaker, just last week, I, along with many MPs in her own party, were briefed by the Royal Navy on the vulnerability of our subsea communications and energy infrastructure. We have also seen a pervasive rise in sabotage attacks on subsea cables in the Baltic, affecting our Scandinavian allies. If Chinese manufactured turbines are installed, security experts have warned that sensors could spy on British seas, defence submarine programmes, and indeed the layout of our energy infrastructure. We would be reliant on Chinese equipment and software, Chinese suppliers for updates and maintenance, handing Beijing significant opportunity for interference. In the current international climate, it is unthinkable to disregard the security implications of this decision. So can I ask the Minister, can she confirm that they have scrapped the Giga scheme that we launched to build British supply chains in energy technologies? What discussions has she had with the Ministry of Defence around their concerns as to the ability to ensure security of our energy system? What safeguards will be in place to prevent Chinese maintenance ships accessing these turbines for repairs? What guarantees has she had, if any, from our defence and security agencies that this investment will pose no threat to our national security? And if such assurances are not forthcoming, will she revisit this decision and put a halt to the madness of allowing the People's Republic of China to have such a significant stake in our energy system?
I think my starting point when the Shadow Minister, sorry, it's me, I'm the Minister now, when he said about revisiting this decision, and no decision's been made at the moment, we're undergoing rigorous processes to look at the role of China in our supply chain, in investment in critical infrastructure in this country. And I can't provide a running commentary on individual cases. He'll know, having been in my position, why that is so important that we don't do that. But as I've made clear already, we are taking into account the national security considerations as well as our need for investment in the supply chain. I would say that in terms of the legacy that we were left by the previous minister, is that he was perfectly happy to leave our energy system exposed with the British people paying the price. And the retreat, the under new management line that he was parroting earlier this week, would leave us even more exposed to those petrostates, to the dictators. We are getting on with our clean power mission to end energy security, and I'll take no lessons from him on energy security, given their record.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to hear the Minister point out that we are left with a legacy of an absolutely vacant industrial strategy when it comes to green investment over the past 14 years. And I urge her to explain further how we might be able to make sure that we are developing the skills and competencies in this country to make sure that we have good, strong, ethical supply chains.
Thank my honourable friend for that question. One of the things we have launched is the Clean Industry Bonus, which will be absolutely crucial in terms of protecting our supply chain. We're investing through GB Energy and through the National Wealth Fund. As I mentioned, lithium in Cornwall is just one example. And through the Global Clean Power Alliance, which we launched at the end of last year, we will be bringing together our counterparts from other countries, including at the IEA conference in April, to look at a supply chain mission so we can deal with these issues, because they're not just issues that affect us in this country. As other countries seek to decarbonise, seek to increase the role of renewables, there are capacity issues across that supply chain, and that's something that we all need to deal with, cooperating together.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Pippa Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for bringing this urgent question, which is so important. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the Minister has rightly said, energy security has been a key term in this chamber. There are two ways of looking at energy security. First of all, which is to generate our own renewable energy to avoid volatility, price volatility, exposure to authoritarian regimes, ensuring we've got the jobs here at home for design and construction. Secondly, it's about our national security issues around our energy infrastructure. That's also a term of energy security. A former MI6 chief has warned of the vulnerabilities, either deliberate or inadvertent, posed by foreign-controlled software embedded in our energy infrastructure. Given these serious concerns, can the Minister guarantee that any further investment in Scotland will ensure that this increases both the energy and national security future?
Thank you. As I've said, there are robust processes, and we are going through these processes to try to make absolutely sure that that our national security is not compromised by investment from overseas, and that is something we'll continue to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Grangemouth refinery is a key piece of vital infrastructure for Scotland, and its economic contribution to the Scottish economy every year is over £400 million. The Grangemouth refinery is also a joint venture between PetroChina, owned by the Chinese state, and INEOS, a multinational conglomerate. Together they are Petro-INEOS. The refinery is due to close, with thousands of jobs being lost, an unjust transition, and Scotland having to rely on importing oil, all at a time of great global volatility. Why is the government allowing a foreign government and private capital dictate Scotland's industrial capacity, its ability to produce oil, and overall our national security?
Well, we're not allowing anyone to dictate to us, and I know that the Honourable Member has been deep in conversation with the Minister for Energy for some time over the future of Grangemouth. But as I reiterated, we absolutely need to attract the investment that we need to meet our clean power mission, to secure our future energy security, and in the long run bring down bills for the British people. We need to balance national security concerns as in tandem with that, and neither one of them takes priority. We need to tackle those challenges together, and that's what we'll do.
Ian Duncan-Smith. Sir.
Mr. Speaker, whatever the question is about energy, China is not the answer. It's on two fronts. We know that the MOD and the Department of Energy Security has raised objections about the Treasury's push to bring Minyang Smart Energy into the circuit on this one, to bid for this. The second thing is that China is determined to use slave labour in their products. We are, under this government, investing in solar arrays which have a huge amount of slave labour in them producing polysilicon. Does the government not recognise that their tilt towards China to get them to invest in this runs the real risk of utter dependency on China and, of course, serious threats to our security, highlighted endlessly by the security services? Will they now stop?
I recognise that the Right Honourable Member has long-standing concerns about the role of China and its investment in our economy, and he's been a great champion of raising concerns about forced labour. He's right to raise those concerns. We have set up the Solar Task Force, I'm sure he's aware, to look at the issue of whether there's forced labour in our solar supply chains. We also, as I said, with the Global Clean Power Alliance, there will be a supply chain mission as part of that launched. And as I said, it's not something that one country can tackle by itself. We all need to be alert to the risks of slave labour. I know that there was an amendment passed in the House of Lords last night that means the issue's coming back to the Chamber soon. I look forward to the discussion then.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that developing our economic and trading relationships with other nations is one lever of many that this government is using to drive growth and investment alongside planning reforms, public investment and a proper industrial strategy for the people of the UK, but also for the people in my city, and at the same time ensuring that we work across departments to always have our nation's security at its core?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we're doing this through a number of levers. We have the growth mission, we have the clean power mission, working hand in hand to make sure that energy security and the decarbonisation of our power system contributes to growth in this country, and that means it contributes to job creation in this country, as well as, in some cases, overseas investment. We have the We've set up Great British Energy, we have the National Wealth Fund, we have the Clean Industry Bonus. All of those will help us achieve those objectives.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Have ministers or officials in the Ministry of Defence, the Home Office or the Security Services raised any concerns with her department over the possibility of offshore structures in British waters being used for Chinese intelligence gathering technology? And if there are sensitive matters which cannot be discussed in this House, will she commit to holding a private briefing for members of Parliament on the security implications of energy infrastructure from China?
Minister.
Okay. I don't think I can comment on the extent of conversations other than to reassure the honourable member that of course these conversations are taking place. Of course there are robust processes that we are going through and there'll be ongoing conversations. Again, because it's not my specific role, I wouldn't be able to say whether that is information that can be shared. I don't think it can be shared on a day-to-day basis, but perhaps if there's a briefing that we could arrange with members to give them some reassurance as to the general approach, I'll investigate whether we can do that.
Melanie Arm.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say I'm surprised at the benches opposite. They seem to have forgotten when they were pushing on this country the golden era of the relationship between the UK and China. And some of this is a legacy that remains from their time in government. And so I think that they should just be careful about how they're approaching this conversation. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to point out to the Minister the role that Grimsby plays in servicing and supporting operations of offshore wind, not only around UK waters, but also as far as Taiwan. Those skills and those competencies and capabilities do exist here in the country, so I'd like to ask the Minister what additional support will be given to expand those capabilities and support for those skills in this country.
Minister.
My honourable friend has been a real champion for Grimsby. I'm very glad to see her returned at the recent election so she can carry on championing all the potential that Grimsby has to offer, not least in terms of the wind sector. We think it's really important that we link up the skills and the capacity. That's one of the obstacles. We talk very often about how grid capacity and how planning issues can hold up the rollout of clean power, but actually we know that we've got to have the skills base as well, and we're working with the Department of Education very much on that, how we can train the workforce and develop through things like the Growth and Skills Levy capacity within the existing workforce as well to work on these exciting new projects.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister speaks about being reliant on petrochemical states and dictatorships who supplied the fuel needed for our energy system. And yet the vast majority of the processed materials that are needed, whether we construct them here or not, come from China. We recognise that some of these countries were dictators, but can the Minister at the dispatch box now confirm to this House that a country that uses slave labour, a country that has carried out the most horrendous crimes against the Uyghur population, a country that has sanctioned our own parliamentarians, is indeed as much as a dictatorship as the countries that she says we no longer want to be reliant on?
Well, if we followed the approach being suggested by the opposition front bench now, we would be very firmly back in the hands of the petrostates and the dictators. And we've seen... But in terms of relationship with China, as I've said, we will cooperate where we can, we will compete where we need to, and we will absolutely challenge if we must. And we've been clear that no company in the UK should have forced labour in the supply chain. This is why we've set up the Solar Task Force. This is why we're going through the robust processes ahead of the decision that we're talking about here today. And I will take no lessons from the honourable member, because we've had 14 years of being exposed to volatile energy markets, and we are trying to recreate our energy security through this investment.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Minister agree that after a real neglect of our energy infrastructure for the last 14 years, setting up GB Energy to help UK ownership of energy production in the future can only be a good thing, and our investment in critical minerals in Cornwall particularly, and the supply chain for floating offshore wind, will be crucial to secure our national security?
Minister.
On the one hand, the honourable members raise concerns about critical minerals being imported from abroad. And then when my honourable friend from Cornwall, who again is a real champion for her area, when she praises the investment that we have put into lithium extraction in Cornwall, they start jeering. And but through GB Energy, through the National Wealth Fund, we will continue to do that investment.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To have true energy security, we need homegrown capability at all stages of the development of renewable energy infrastructure, from the earliest research to maintenance and decommissioning. So can the Minister tell me what steps she is taking to ensure that we have that homegrown full life cycle capability?
Minister.
I think from the honourable member's question, she may be talking about community energy. I'm not quite clear, but no. In that case, I'm saying, but it is really important, I think, that any investment is place-based, and we need to look at developing the capability right from skills and what the capacity of the local authorities are, which is where things like community energy comes in, but then also making sure that the finance goes where the investment is needed. And if I haven't understood the honourable member's question, I'd be happy to take it up with her afterwards.
Tom Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Minister's engagement on this topic. To have meaningful and serious discussions with other major economies is absolutely vital for our success. Does the Minister agree with me that these discussions are key not only to securing our economic aims, but also tackling the climate and nature crisis and also our wider international objectives?
Minister.
Yeah, that international cooperation is absolutely crucial, and that does mean talking to countries with whom we share a great deal in common and have signed up the same objectives, but it also means talking to other countries to try to bring them with us too. And that is why we're hosting the IEA Summit in April in London. That is why we've set up the Global Clean Power Alliance, and that is why the Prime Minister went to the climate change talks in COP in Baku last autumn and showed international leadership, which is something that has been very much lacking from the UK government in previous years.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clearly, the national security concerns are being expressed across the House. Will the Minister give an undertaking that the construction, maintenance and indeed access to software will be carried out by British workers on British ships and not subcontracted to foreign powers?
Minister.
As I've said, I can't comment on individual cases, but there are processes to make sure that our national security is protected as we look ahead.
Tony Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's reassurance about the Government's rigorous scrutiny of energy projects involving Chinese technologies, and I understand the argument that at the current stage of our transition to net zero, we may need to look further afield to meet our domestic energy needs. But will the Minister agree with me that the long-term plan ought to be to reduce reliance on Chinese technology in the UK energy sector and rather to use British-made green technologies where there can be no concerns around national security or about ethical supply chains?
Minister.
Yeah, I agree absolutely, and that's why we are doing all we can to increase capacity through things like the Clean Industry Bonus, through investment from the National Wealth Fund, through the role of GB Energy and all the other measures that we'll be taking our industrial strategy to try to ensure that we keep the jobs in the UK and we create new jobs in the UK too.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ministers all over the place on this. In her opening remarks, she said that the United Kingdom has a world-leading renewable energy industry. Well, if we did, we wouldn't be having this discussion about foreign imported infrastructure. So will she commit to understand, notwithstanding the total failure of the Tories over 14 years to invest in the industrial base of renewable energy manufacturing across the United Kingdom, what is her strategy and her government strategy to get right in front of this, not just in terms of manufacturing, but also in terms of resource supply, enterprise resource planning, intellectual property? What is the big shift that this government has got planned? Because I just hear jibber-jabber.
That's not very polite of the honourable member, but as I've said, we are doing all we can to attract investment into the UK so that we can be as reliant as possible on our own resources, and that means our own supply chain, that means attracting investment and so on, but we are doing it through the National Wealth Fund, we're doing it through GB Energy, and there was much discussion, I don't know to what extent the honourable member took part in the debate around the GB Energy, the Great British Energy Bill, but we we are absolutely doing that. And on an international level, as I said, this has to be solved on an international level. We're doing a lot of work with our colleagues in terms of making the North Sea the green power plant of Europe through NSEC, the North Seas Energy Cooperation Council, and we've set up the Global Clean Power Alliance. And we cannot do this alone. We cannot do it acting alone. I know that the SNP prefers that approach, but we're absolutely doing it in cooperation, but we're doing it in the best interest of the British economy as well.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that her department's work is entirely consistent with the government's approach to China, cooperate where we can, compete where we need to, and challenge where we must?
Minister.
I mean, that is exactly our approach, and that is the right approach. I don't know whether the opposition front bench would advocate not cooperating with China where we can, but they're an incredibly important player on the world stage, and we gain nothing from completely turning our backs on them and not engaging in that dialogue.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we saw how Russia responded in the global tariffs and sanctions market by trying to use its dominance in the nuclear fuel market to put pressure on the allies of Ukraine. And therefore, we've seen that vulnerability in our energy supply chain when our enemies and allies of those enemies want to use it against us. The former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearland, has said that the government's target to decarbonise the grid hands power to Beijing. And when we talk about having reliance on dictator states, we have enough oil and gas in the UK to do that without any reliance. So why don't we just get drilling and get our own oil and our own gas out of the ground? So has the government, given I suspect in their mad dash to decarbonise the grid are not going to do that, has the government undertaken a risk assessment of the strategic vulnerability to our national security of our increasing reliance on Chinese rare earth minerals and battery production?
Minister.
I think I have already made very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are ongoing conversations about that, and we take national security incredibly seriously when we look at investment decisions. In terms of what he had to say about producing more oil and gas here for our own use, I think he needs a lesson in how the energy markets actually work. There's no guarantee that it would be used here.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The issue with this is the rush that the Labour government have to decarbonise by 2030. Because of that rush, we do not have the capabilities in this country at the moment to fulfil all the requirements that are needed to deliver those projects. Until the point where we are, we will always be reliant on overseas powers, overseas people like the Chinese government, like Chinese manufacturers, to deliver what we need in order to decarbonise. Is this government prepared and happy to sacrifice our national security and our energy security in order to reach that 2030 target?
Minister.
That sounds very much like the honourable member has made the case for an industrial strategy that ensures that we can match demand with supply, and that's an approach that was particularly missing from the last government.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Almost on a weekly basis, we are lectured by the net zero obsessed Secretary of State that the race for renewables is necessary in order to give us a secure future supply of energy in this country. And yet, the renewable industry is increasingly dependent upon Chinese technology and rare earth metals, which the Chinese control 70% of. So we're placing our future energy supply in the hands of a dictatorship which has proved itself in other states to be willing to use the infrastructure to blackmail the countries in which it's based. Is this not a case that we should be looking at the supply of fossil fuels that we have in this country, decades of gas and oil which could be used? We would secure this, we'd be sure that we could use it and we wouldn't be interfered by others in using it.
Minister.
We absolutely believe that the best route to energy security is by our Clean Power by 2030 mission and further investment in renewables, and that remains our stance.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her answers to the questions? The Minister will be aware that the costly environmental obligations which government imposes on home manufactured goods are not adhered to by many other nations, which prevents our UK manufacturers from being able to compete on many occasions. Combined with human rights breaches routinely carried out by the Chinese business on Uyghurs, on Falun Gong, on Christians and many other ethnic minorities. Does the Minister not agree that these considerations must be equally weighted with cost, and it will seem that human rights and Chinese production will never add up, and this must inform any contract offered by this nation of ours? Thank you.
Minister.
I think that the honourable member has frequently raised almost every issue you can think of in this chamber, but I know that I've taken part in very many debates about human rights in countries of concern overseas over the years. He's absolutely right to flag those concerns. As I said, we have the Solar Task Force, we have the supply chain mission with the Global Clean Power Alliance. We are very much alert to this. We do not want to see forced labour or any form of modern slavery in our supply chains, and that is something that we're absolutely determined to take action on.
That concludes the urgent question. We now come to the statement, and I'll allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over and members to come in. Statement, Minister Dan Jarvis.
Thank you. With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will make a statement on the publication of the Prevent Learning Review into the perpetrator of the attack that tragically killed Sir David Amess on the 15th of October 2021. Sir David Amess was a beloved member of this House, a hugely respected parliamentarian. His popularity extended right across the political divide. To win and keep the respect of those outside one's own party is, as we all know, a rare accomplishment. Over nearly 40 years of service in this place, Sir David fought every day for his constituents. He advanced numerous causes with compassion, persistence and skill, and members on all sides of the House knew him as a warm, respectful and always fair parliamentarian. His legacy lives on, not least in Southend, which now has the city status he campaigned so determinedly for. He will never be forgotten, and as the motto on Sir David's memorial shield behind me states, his light remains. Now, whilst this House has lost a hugely valued member on that terrible day, Sir David's wife and children lost a loving husband and a devoted father. They are in our thoughts and prayers today and always. Together with the Home Secretary, who spoke with Sir David's family recently, I recognise the courage and persistence they have shown in seeking the answers that they deserve. As the House will know, it was a heinous act of violence on the 15th of October 2021 that took Sir David away from those who knew and loved him. The killer, Ali Harbi Ali, and I won't say his name again, was convicted of murder in April 2022 and received a whole life sentence. The judge said that this was a murder that struck at the heart of our democracy, and he had no doubt whatsoever that the nature of this case meant that the perpetrator must be kept in prison for the rest of his life. The perpetrator had previously been referred to the Prevent programme and subsequently to the Specialist Channel programme between 2014 and 2016, between 5 and 7 years before the attack took place. Immediately after the attack, a Prevent Learning Review was jointly commissioned by the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Policing to examine what happened in the case and see whether lessons needed to be rapidly learned. It was completed in February 2022. Now, last week, I made a statement to the House on the Government's publication of the Prevent Learning Review concerning the perpetrator of the abhorrent attack in Southport. Today, we're taking a further step to enable public scrutiny of Prevent, and in recognition of the seriousness of the terrible attack on Sir David, by publishing the Prevent Learning Review conducted in this case too. The perpetrator of the attack on Sir David became known to Prevent in October 2014, when he was referred by his school after teachers identified a change in his behaviour. The case was adopted by the Channel Multi-Agency Early Intervention Programme in November of 2014. An intervention provider who specialised in tackling Islamist extremism was assigned to work with him. The perpetrator was exited from Channel in April 2015 after his terrorism risk was assessed as low. A 12-month post-exit police review in 2016 also found no terrorism concerns, and the case was closed to Prevent at that point. There were no further Prevent referrals in the 5 years between the case being closed and the attack. The Prevent Learning Review examined how Prevent dealt with the perpetrator's risk and how far the improvements made to Prevent since he was referred 7 years prior would have impacted upon his management. The review considered both the handling of the case at the time and also the changes that had been made to Prevent since the referral in 2014. It examined how far those changes addressed any problems identified and then made a series of recommendations. The reviewer found that from the material reviewed, the assessment in terms of the perpetrator's vulnerabilities was problematic, and this ultimately led to questionable decision-making and suboptimal handling of the case during the time he was engaged with Prevent and Channel. It identified that the vulnerability assessment framework was not followed, with the perpetrator's symptoms being prioritised over addressing the underlying causes of his vulnerabilities. The reviewer ultimately found that while Prevent policy and guidance at the time was mostly followed, the case was exited from Prevent too quickly. The reviewer identified 6 issues, namely that the support given did not tackle all of the vulnerabilities identified, record keeping was problematic and the rationale for certain decisions was not explicit, responsibilities between police and the local authority were blurred, the tool used for identifying an individual's vulnerability to radicalisation was outdated, the school that made the referral to Prevent should have been involved in discussions to help determine risk and appropriate support, and the tasking of the intervention provider was problematic, with a miscommunication leading to only 1 session being provided instead of 2. The reviewer then examined how far changes in the Prevent programme since 2016 had addressed these issues. The reviewer recognised the significant changes that had been made to Prevent since the perpetrator was managed, in particular the introduction of the statutory Prevent and Channel duties under the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act of 2015. The reviewer concluded that over the intervening period there have been considerable changes to policy and guidance for both the police and the wider Prevent arena, including Channel. Whilst a number of the issues in the perpetrator's case would most likely not be repeated today, there were still a number of areas which could be considered as requiring further work in order to mitigate against future failures. The reviewer made 4 recommendations for actions to further strengthen Prevent. These were to improve the referral process, strengthen the initial intelligence assessment process, update the tool used to identify vulnerability to being drawn into terrorism, and to not reduce data retention periods. Since the report, the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Policing have fully implemented all 4 recommendations. First, a single national referral form was launched to encourage a consistent approach to referrals, building this into new training packages and mandating its use via statutory guidance. Second, training has been delivered to police staff to strengthen the initial intelligence check stage, ensuring their understanding of Prevent is robust. Third, a new Prevent assessment framework was rolled out in September of 2024. This replaces the tools previously used to assess all referrals and cases in the Prevent system. And fourth, data retention periods were fully reviewed in 2023, and a joint decision was taken by the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Policing to maintain retention review periods at 6 years or 6 years after the 12-month review for Channel cases. In addition to the publication of the Prevent Learning Review, we recognise the significant concerns that remain over the way in which Prevent dealt with the perpetrator, as well as the need to ensure that the recommendations it suggested for improving the scheme have been properly implemented. Last week, I set out to the House a series of new reforms instituted by the government to strengthen the Prevent programme, recognising the vital work done by officers across the country to keep people safe. That included the creation of a new independent Prevent Commissioner. And I can today inform the House that the Home Secretary has asked the Prevent Commissioner to review the Prevent programme's interactions with the perpetrator in this case and ensure the implementation of all relevant recommendations. We will ensure that the Amis family have the support they need to engage with the Prevent Commissioner in this work so that they can have confidence that it will get to the truth about any failings in the scheme. Madam Deputy Speaker, two further important issues have been raised which are relevant to this case: local policing and members' security. On local policing, concerns have been raised by the Amis family about the way in which Essex Police handled this case. A complaint has been made and referred back to the local force by the IOPC for consideration. That process must be allowed to follow its course. However, I can inform the House that the Home Secretary has written to the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner of Essex Police, asking them to set out how the investigation will be conducted and to be kept updated as the investigation progresses. Secondly, on members' security, this is something that the Home Secretary and I care deeply about, and I know that it is a matter to which Mr. Speaker attaches the utmost importance, as will all members right across this House. A review of security measures for MPs commissioned under the previous government has concluded, and all the recommendations have been implemented. We must ensure that the learnings from this case have been properly implemented, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Speaker for his continued leadership on these matters. The Speaker's Conference is specifically considering what reforms are necessary to further improve MPs' security and safety. This is another important step. And the Leader of the House, the Home Secretary and myself look forward to working closely with the Speaker and with all members to ensure that the facts of the appalling murder of Sir David are properly considered as part of the Speaker's Conference work, and that the Parliamentary Security Department implements the recommendations it made following the review it conducted into the aftermath of Sir David's death. I'm also grateful to previous Home Secretaries and Security Ministers for their efforts in this area. Our democracy is precious, and this government will defend it against any and all threats, not least through the Defending Democracy Task Force, where we are mounting a whole-of-government response to combat these threats, including ensuring that elected representatives can perform their duties safely and without fear. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, I want to pay tribute once more to Sir David. He was a giant of this House, and we miss him dearly. In all that he did, Sir David epitomised public service at its best. It is beyond a tragedy that we can no longer seek his advice or rely on his wisdom. We can, though, follow his example and devote ourselves every day to the task of building a better and safer Britain. That is our shared challenge, Madam Deputy Speaker, and under this government, nothing will matter more. I commend this statement to the House.
I call Chris Philp, Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me start by thanking the Security Minister for providing advance sight of his statement and advance sight of the Prevent Learning review into Sir David Amos's tragic murder, and for the courtesy and collegiality with which he's conducted our discussions on this topic in recent days. I'm grateful to the Security Minister for that. Let me now add my words to those of the Security Minister in remembering our colleague Sir David Amos. All of those who served with him in this House held him in great affection and in the highest regard. He was a colleague who was, I think, loved across the House, is remembered fondly across the House, and I think his particular form of charm, kindness and good humour is something everybody who ever met David will remember. And I know every day that I walk into this chamber and see his shield up there on the wall, opposite, of course, Joe Cox's, I remember David, and I remember the loss that we and everyone in his constituency, and of course, most of all, his family, have suffered. I spoke earlier today to Sir David's wife, Julia, and I'd like to pay tribute to her and her daughters for the courage and the fortitude that they have shown over these past few years in campaigning to get the answers that they have needed. And I would like to thank as well the former Member of Parliament for Southend, Anna Firth, who has been supporting Julia and her family throughout this difficult time. And I'd like to thank the Home Secretary as well for meeting, I know, Lady Julia quite recently. I'm grateful to the Home Secretary for taking the time to do that. Now, turning to the Prevent Learning Review, which I've recently received and which I believe is about to be published. I noticed it is a redacted version. I'd be grateful if the Security Minister can just confirm that nothing material has been redacted. I'm sure it hasn't, but it would be helpful just to have that clarified by the Security Minister. Now, we heard in the Security Minister's statement a moment ago, and I thank him for the thoughtful and considered way in which he made that statement, that the Prevent Learning Review did identify a number of failings in the way that Prevent handled the murderer of our late colleague, and that there were opportunities for further intervention to have been made. Now, while I welcome the fact this report's been published, I welcome the fact that the new Prevent Commissioner will conduct a further review, I do think there are questions still relating to this case and others that do merit perhaps a more formal inquiry to make sure we really have got to the bottom of this. And there are, of course, as well, other cases where there are questions around whether perpetrators of violence either encountered Prevent and could have been better identified and interdicted, or indeed where they encountered mental health services. And those cases which may merit further inquiry would include the case of Ahmed Hassan, where 50 people were injured on a tube train following the detonation of a device. The case of Usman Khan on London Bridge, Kari Sadala, who murdered 3 men in Reading, and of course the Southport case we've discussed in this House recently. It strikes me there are systemic issues, both with the failure of Prevent to identify and stop potential perpetrators, and also associated with that the operation of the mental health system and whether more could be done. And because these are systemic issues, I do think perhaps a more formal inquiry might be, or is in fact, merited, and I would welcome the Security Minister's views on that. In terms of these more systemic issues, there are 2 things I'd like to particularly raise, which I'd be interested to hear the Security Minister's response on, both of which I mentioned to the Security Minister just individually a few days ago. The first of those is that in the last 25 or 26 years, so since 1999, 94 out of 101 murders committed by terrorists in the United Kingdom were committed by Islamist terrorists, 94%. And yet, for the most recent figures available, only 13% of the Prevent caseload relates to Islamist extremism, which suggests on the face of it quite strongly that Prevent is under-engaging those with Islamist ideologies who go on to commit these serious offences. And I know the Shawcross Review in part addressed that issue, but I think it is so serious and that disparity is so stark. I would appreciate the Security Minister's views on that, and that is a topic a further inquiry might address. The second area, which the Security Minister and I briefly discussed on Monday evening, concerns the mental health bill currently making its way through the House of Lords. Now, many of these cases entail extremist terrorist ideology, but many of them also touch on mental health issues and whether better treatment should be given, or indeed whether people should be sectioned and detained under the Mental Health Act in order to protect the public. That consideration is relevant, of course, to the Valdo Caldaconi case, as well as some of these cases that I've mentioned here. The bill, as drafted, for reasons I think ministers in DHSC have set out, makes it harder to detain people under the Mental Health Act. And I'm concerned that may inadvertently have adverse implications for public safety if people who should be detained under the Mental Health Act to protect the public might now not be detained. And that is a matter of concern. And as the Security Minister in the Home Office, I know that the Security Minister will want to respond specifically to that issue. But Madam Deputy Speaker, this matter started from a terrible tragedy. More than just a colleague, a loved colleague, a husband and a father lost his life in the course of doing his duty as a Member of Parliament. Of course, part of the testimony to Sir David is the fact that Southend is now a city. That is a memorial that will last forever. But let us make sure we also learn those lessons and take the actions needed to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Minister.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Shadow Home Secretary for the points that he's raised and for the way in which he's approached this statement. He mentioned, and I'm very pleased that he did, that he'd spoken to Lady Amos this morning. So let me take the opportunity again to reiterate how courageous the Home Secretary and I think that the Amos family have been in pursuing answers about Sir David's murder. They entirely understandably wanted the government to publish the Prevent Learning Review, and we've done that today. And as I referenced earlier, the Home Secretary has also asked the Independent Prevent Commissioner to look carefully at the details of this case, and we will progress that at pace. The Home Secretary, as I referenced earlier, has also written to Essex Police about this matter. But let me also say that we continue to want to work very closely with the Amos family, and I know that the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and myself stand ready to meet with them again in the near future to discuss what more we might be able to do to support them. The Shadow Home Secretary specifically asked me about redactions in the Prevent Learning Review, and I'm happy to confirm that nothing material has been redacted. The report is now live on gov.uk, and it contains only very minimal redactions. These are to obscure the names of people that worked with the perpetrator, including teachers and police officers, and personal information about the perpetrator's family, and some national security sensitivities, but nothing material has been redacted. Can I say to the Shadow Home Secretary that I hope that there is much common cause here. And I hope also that he will acknowledge that there are a number of reforms with regard to the Prevent programme that we've referenced recently, including with regard to the point that he rightly made about mental health provision. And I'll say a bit more to him about that in just a moment. But let me respond to the particular point he made in relation to the threat from Islamist extremism and prevent referrals. He's right. We should never forget the horrendous death toll caused by Islamist extremism over the last 20 years. It is the foremost threat that we face, and we must and will address it head on. I can say to him that the number of Islamist referrals into Prevent last year did increase by 17%, but this was from too low a base. Work is already underway to improve ideology training and build awareness of the ideologies that drive radicalisation. But we should be clear about the fact that the threat is evolving fast. The Director-General of MI5 said in October that 75% of counter-terrorism work was Islamist extremism in nature, 25% extreme right-wing. 13% of those being investigated by MI5 were under the age of 18. And he flagged that MI5 was seeing a dizzying range of beliefs and ideologies. The Southport attack reflects how that particular threat is changing. I said I'd come back to him about the point he made about mental health, because, as he knows, the government's mental health legislation is currently in the other place. The purpose of the Mental Health Act is to ensure that clinicians have the power to detain and treat mentally unwell people who present a risk to themselves or to others. I can tell him that the new bill will not change that. It's specifically designed to make it more likely that those detained will seek help, complete their treatment successfully, and stay in contact with authorities where needed, reducing the risk to themselves and others. And I can also tell him that NHS England has asked every mental health trust to review the findings of the Care Quality Commission report published in August and set out action plans for how they treat and engage with people who have serious mental illness, including how they work with other agencies such as the police. The trusts have also been instructed not to discharge people if they do not attend appointments. I hope that goes some way to answering the questions the Shadow Home Secretary has raised, but I'm very happy to continue the conversation with him thereafter.
David Burton-Sampson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank my honourable friend, the Minister, and of course the Home Secretary for coming here to this place today to give that statement. None of us in this House can imagine the pain, the suffering and the anger that the Amos family are going through after losing their beloved Sir David. He was their father, he was their husband, and I've met with the family and they are still in absolute devastation. And we should hold them in our thoughts today. We should never forget Sir David, and I pay tribute to him and to the family for the way that they have conducted themselves throughout this whole sorry affair. I will continue working closely with the family and with the Home Secretary and her team to ensure that they get the support that they need and that they get the answers that they need. We'll never forget Sir David in Southend, and shortly we'll be putting some memory boards up on the Chalkwell Lifeguard Station reflecting Sir David's life and also our journey to becoming a city. And I thank Lady Julia and the local councillors for working closely with me on this project. I also welcome the news today that the Prevent Commissioner will be reviewing this particular case and will be reviewing the implementation of the recommendations in relation to this case. And I'm also glad to hear that the Home Secretary has written to Essex Police about the complaint that has been logged. And I thank her for her support in this matter. It's important that that matter is seen through so that once again the family get the answers that they deserve. So I ask the Minister and obviously the Home Secretary to give me the assurances that they will continue to work closely with me and most importantly the Amos family so that we can get them these answers and we can give them the comfort so that they can move on with their lives. They'll never forget, but we can help them to now move forward. Thank you.
Minister.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member, not least because this is of course an issue that will be of the most profound importance to his constituents. He's completely right that we must hold Sir David's family in our thoughts and in our hearts today. And he's also completely right that we should strive to ensure, and I know that we will, that we never forget Sir David. The Honourable Member is standing very close to the point at which I remember Sir David used to stand. He was, amongst many other things, a complete master of the pre-recess adjournment debate. And I can see him now, stood there, confidently, expertly, authoritatively, reading off a very, very long list of requests that he completely expected the government to get on with and deliver for his constituents. He was truly inspirational, and we will never forget him. And of course, I can give the Honourable Member absolutely the assurances that he seeks, that we will continue to work with the family and with all members to ensure that both through the work of the Independent Prevent Commissioner and the work that I referenced earlier with regard to the Home Secretary writing to Essex Police, that we will continue to work closely with the family and ensure that they get the answers that they rightly deserve.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful, as I always am, to the Minister for advance sight of his statement. What happened to Sir David Amess was a terrible tragedy, and though I am new to this House, I have heard many stories of his kindness and his compassion, and I know he is sorely missed across these benches. We owe it to Sir David's grieving family and to the people of Southend to ensure that a tragedy like this can never happen again. And that means ensuring our counter-terrorism strategy is fit for purpose and able to work with communities to tackle the modern challenges our world is facing. The Liberal Democrats have long raised questions about whether Prevent is best placed to deliver this. And as we've learned over recent weeks, these failures are not happening in isolation, so it's right that the Government has asked the Prevent Commissioner to look at this case. I would welcome further assurances that the Commissioner will have a wide-ranging remit to take a comprehensive look at Prevent, and I would again urge the Minister to put this role on a statutory footing. This must include looking at how Prevent communicates with other agencies like local authorities and different police forces. Local communities need to be at the centre of our counter-terrorism strategy, whether that means keeping them safe and ensuring they are effectively engaged. So will the Minister outline how communities will be consulted on any upcoming counter-extremism strategies? And as the Minister mentioned, this tragic case has also brought to light questions about MP safety. So could the Minister please provide some more details on how the Defending Democracy Task Force is progressing with its work, particularly in the area of helping to keep members and their families safe? It's my hope that we can continue to work across this House to deliver the effective counter-terrorism strategy our country deserves. We owe it to the Amess family to make this a reality.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for the way that she's approached this statement and for the very sensible and reasonable points that she's made today, as she always does. She made an important point, I think, about the role and remit of the Independent Commissioner. I hope that she would acknowledge, as all honourable members I hope would, that Lord Anderson is somebody who is superbly qualified to fulfil this role. He is a complete expert in this particular area of public policy, and he brings an authority, a credibility and an integrity to the role. And the Home Secretary and I look forward to working closely with him, but of course I reiterate the point about his independence. She rightly, I think, raised the importance of the work that is taking place across government with regard to counter-extremism. That is work that is underway and is something that is being progressed very closely with other government departments, specifically with MHCLG, but it is a priority for this government, and we will endeavour to update the House in the relatively near future about the progress that is being made with that work. Finally, I'm grateful to her for referencing the work of the Defending Democracy Task Force. This was an initiative that was set up by the previous government, but it is a process that we think is absolutely fundamental to ensuring that those people who step forward to serve as elected representatives, whether it is in this House or local government, whether that be police and crime commissioners or metro mayors, are able to perform their duties without fear or favour. And the remit of the Defending Democracy Task Force means that we will ensure the most effective cross-government response, working with operational partners and with law enforcement, so that those elected members can go about their duties unencumbered by the completely unacceptable harassment and intimidation that we continue to see.
Theo Alaba.
Speaker. Sir David Amess was a hugely respected parliamentarian with massive popularity across both parties and within his wider community. He worked every day with true compassion to improve the lives of residents in South and Western Lee, South and East and Rochford, and more widely. This legacy, myself and my constituency neighbour bring with us as we continue the hard work of representing our communities. I'm pleased the Prevent Learning Review published today has looked into Sir David Amess's attack. Please can I also commend the hard work from Sir David Amess's family, my honourable friend in South and Western Lee, the former MP for Southend West, and the Home Office, who are committed to preventing such horrific attacks in the future. We must do everything in our power to prevent anything so tragic ever happening again. My thoughts and prayers will always be with his friends and family. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I'm very grateful to him for the words that he's spoken, and I want to reiterate the words that he made and that the Shadow Home Secretary made earlier with regard to Anna Firth. We're grateful to the support that she has provided and the contribution that she continues to make. With the indulgence of you, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the Honourable Member has just provided me with an opportunity to offer one further personal recollection of Sir David. He responded to my maiden speech in 2011. I made the speech from over there. He responded to what I think by any metric was a pretty average maiden speech, but the warmth of his response was something that has stayed with me forever. And from that point onwards, every time we saw each other, we would always reminisce about how overly generous he had been following my maiden speech. But for that, and for many other reasons beside, I'll always be incredibly grateful to David Amos.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his generous tribute to Sir David. Yes, Southend is now a city, so we comfort ourselves that on that at least he won in the end. We all miss him, not least myself. I welcome what the Minister has said about an inquiry into whether Essex Police could have done more to protect him. I welcome the Speaker's conference about MP security, Mom. I have great regard for the Minister, he knows this. But I'm afraid to hear that Prevent may have perhaps acted suboptimally is an appalling Whitehall euphemism for errors that may have contributed to the death of an MP in the line of duty. On Prevent specifically, as well as possible failures there, we know that the murderer in Southport had multiple interactions with Prevent, and yet still those 3 innocent children were tragically murdered. We've spent a fortune on Prevent, but it seems that ultimately it doesn't do what it says on the tin. So lastly, can I ask the Minister, as I understand it, the Amos family, rightfully seeking answers, have asked if the errors that may have occurred with Sir David and almost certainly occurred in Southport could somehow be looked into in more detail via the auspices of the Southport inquiry. That seems a very reasonable request given the exceptional circumstances. Could the Minister and the Home Secretary, who's in her place rightfully beside him, consider that request very seriously and hopefully grant it?
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman. It's hard, perhaps particularly for newer members, to understand how difficult it must be for those more experienced members like himself who spent so many years on these green benches working so closely with a much beloved colleague. I know that, and looking at him and his direction, he's sat below another shield. And members across the House, I think, understand the pain that is experienced at the loss of our colleagues and our shared determination to work together and with others to do everything that we possibly can to make sure that those who serve currently in this House have the support and the protections that they both need and deserve. He rightly took the opportunity to reference one of Sir David's many achievements, which is the city status of Southend. We all know that certainly wouldn't have happened without the campaigning effort over many years of Sir David. And I'm grateful to him for acknowledging the work that I know that will be taking place with Essex Police. And I do understand the important concerns that he has made with regard to Prevent. What I can say to him is that the terms of reference with regard to the Southport inquiry are still rightly a matter of discussion between the Home Secretary, the Home Office and the families in that particular case. So I'm not able to make a judgment at this particular point about precisely the terms and conditions of the remit of that particular public inquiry. But what I can do is not only reiterate the point that have already been made, but a further commitment from the Home Secretary and from myself to look very carefully at this, to continue the conversation with the late Sir David's family and with other members and work out what is the best mechanism to provide them and all members of this House with the answers that they both want and deserve.
Mike Taff.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The murder of Sir David Amess cut to the very heart of democracy. He was clearly the very best of British, Madam Deputy Speaker. Minister talked about parliamentary security in his considered statement. I've spoken to many colleagues across all sides of the House who have said that they feel abuse and harassment is peaking and many feel unsafe. You did talk about parliamentary security. Of course, it's unwise to go into details of specific measures, but is the Minister confident that these measures will make us feel safer in this House?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member, as I always am, for the thoughtful contribution that he seeks to make. And best of British, I think, is precisely the right phraseology to apply to Sir David. I think he asks an important question about how we defend our democracy. And he asks about my confidence in the work that we are doing to ensure that members of this House and elected representatives elsewhere can perform their duties with the confidence that they are going to be able to do so safely. I have to be honest with him and say that that is a process that is ongoing. All of us in this place would have experienced threats, harassment and intimidation. I have to say it is particularly worse for women members, and that is a mark of stain on our society, that there are those out there who feel that they can abuse in a particular way elected representatives who are female. What I can give him an absolute assurance is that we are organising and marshalling the resources that we have across government, working with law enforcement, with operational partners and cooperating very closely with Mr Speaker and the authorities in this House to ensure that those who step forward to serve can do so with the security and the comfort of knowing that they are properly protected. I will leave no stone unturned working with colleagues across government to make sure that that is the case, but where individuals, wherever they may be, have concern, I will always make myself available to discuss those concerns with them.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to echo the Minister's praise for Sir David, who was a loved friend to so many, including many members in this House. I welcome the statement today, which is clearly very sobering and a reminder of the importance of getting the Prevent programme right. The seriousness of the statement contrasts quite sharply with the immediate reaction and the debate that followed Sir David's murder, when there was, to be frank, a bizarre and misplaced rush to talk about issues such as online civility rather than the clear threat that was behind the murder. So will the Minister join me in saying it's time for the denialism that we often see about the threat from Islamism to end, and recognising what he said earlier about the changing nature of the threat, agree that as the major terror threat that we face, Islamist extremism should always be the top priority of the Prevent programme?
Well, I'm very grateful to him for the remarks that he's made today, and I know that he speaks with long experience both of working right at the heart of government and in the Home Office, and I think he makes some important points, and I give him an assurance that I will give them further consideration. I think he's also right, though, to reference the changing nature of the threat. Of course, Islamist extremism presents the biggest single challenge that we face as a country. That was made very clear when the Director General of MI5 delivered his annual threat lecture back in October. And he will have heard the comments that I made in response to the point that was made by the Shadow Home Secretary earlier about the number of referrals, and we are looking very closely at those. But I'm grateful to the contribution that he's made. I will reflect on it further, and I'm always happy to discuss it with him.
Matt Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sadly, I never got to meet Sir David, but as we've heard across the House today, his reputation goes before him. He was a loved and valued colleague, respected across the whole House and across both benches. Does the Minister agree with me that he exemplified the best traditions of this place, working hard and working together to make real change? And can we also just take a moment to respect and reflect the officers that turn up at these scenes? As a former police officer myself, attending many scenes like this, it's something that you never want to do and hope never to do again.
I'm very grateful to him for the points that he's made. I completely agree with him. I completely agree with his characterisation of Sir David and his work ethic. And I would also like to take this opportunity to join with him in paying tribute to those brave police officers who step forward under the most exceptionally difficult circumstances for the service that they perform. And I thank him for his service as well.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I remember the day Sir David Amos was tragically murdered very well. I was serving as Lancashire's Police and Crime Commissioner at the time, and I remember having to have some initial conversations with members of this House who were serving at the time, including the former member for Hindburn, Sarah Brickcliffe, who her and her dad had been lifelong friends of Sir David, and I learned an awful lot about how much of a man he was in this Parliament and how much he meant to people by the reaction from those members that I spoke to that day. And looking at the Minister's statement, just pulling out on the reviewer identified 6 issues. I'm not going to read them all out de facto, obviously, but did not tackle all vulnerabilities identified. Record keeping was problematic. Rationale for certain decisions not explicit. Responsibilities between police and local authorities blurred. Radicalisation, the tool you've used for individuals' vulnerability to radicalisation, outdated, it goes on and on. These kind of words and phrases could be taken out of the statement that were made about the tragic incident in Southport. As a fellow North West MP, something incredibly important to us as well. But it could also be taken, there could be words and phrases taken out of many inquiries, many reviews, many statements over many years on cases that are similar to this. And following on from the Shadow Home Secretary's point about that differential between the number of murders that involve terrorism that have Islamist terrorism at the heart being over 90%, but only 13% of the casework being linked to Islamist ideologies is also quite stark. So for me, there are things in this that are around process, quality of following process, quality of work, the interlinking between different public services, but also about culture and about how our public services in different ways have danced around the issue of Islamist extremism and whether Prevent has delivered in terms of identifying and pulling that out and effectively dealing with it. And I would like to echo the words of my honourable friend in terms of it is time, I think, to take a step back from all the individual reviews, inquiries, statements, and take a look at the bigger picture. And I'm not going to press the Minister for a specific answer right now. I don't think this is, and I think the tone that all members have set, this isn't one for point scoring or trying to secure individual things at the dispatch box. I would just like to emphasise to the Minister in his role as he goes forward, looking at this, looking at Southport, looking at others, to step back and just ask whether Prevent is serving the purpose it's there for, whether it is offering value for money, whether it is keeping the public safe from terrorism, and whether it's time to take a broader, more strategic look rather than a case-by-case look.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member. As a former Police and Crime Commissioner, he brings a weight of experience which I know the House is hugely appreciative of. he's right. The Learning Review identifies a number of points that cannot just sit on a shelf. They have to be actioned, and we have to ensure that the processes that are in place are as effective as that they possibly can be. I agree with the point that he made about the disparity between the figures that he referenced in terms of the number of Islamist attacks and the number of prevent referrals. I mean, I can repeat the point that I made earlier about the fact that there has been a 17% increase in those specific referrals in the year ending the 31st of March 2024. But I agree with his analysis, and I think he makes some important points. What I can say to him, that there are a number of measures, including some that I've referenced today, but some others that I referenced in my Southport statement last week, that I think, and I will need to ensure that the House has confidence, will go a significant way to addressing some of the concerns that he has rightly raised. But I thought he made a particularly interesting point at the conclusion of his remarks about stepping back and taking a strategic look at whether the processes, the resources that are in place are appropriate. I will do that, but I'll also want to work very closely with Lord Anderson, because I think Lord Anderson is someone who will add a huge amount of analysis and value in this area, and I very much welcome the opportunity to work with him and with all members, including the honourable gentleman, as we, I hope, accept this as a shared endeavour to ensure that these attacks never happen again.
Alex Barras-Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And first I would like to put on record my sympathies to Sir David, his family and friends. As a new MP myself, I did not have the privilege of knowing him, but I vividly remember the day on which he was murdered. And clearly from the warm words spoken on all sides of this House, he was highly regarded and is sorely missed. I want to thank the Security Minister for that detailed statement. Can he assure me that the lessons of these Prevent Learning Reviews are learned, that all recommendations are implemented, and that there is appropriate tie-in, not just between local authorities, police, national security and national crime agencies, but also with the Defending Democracy Task Force, so that we can collectively work to ensure that, that tragedies like this can never happen again.
Minister.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for the remarks that he's made. I think he makes an important observation about the importance of coordination and ensuring both locally, regionally and nationally all of the relevant agencies and services are in place and are talking and communicating to each other in the most effective way. He's right to reference the Defending Democracy Task Force. That is a mechanism that I chair that brings together a whole of government response and ultimately kind of provides the fulcrum point for discussing and acting upon these matters in government. And it is our specific responsibility to ensure that the services that he's referenced are properly resourced and are properly coordinating with each other. And I'm grateful to him for the points that he has made.
Stephen Gethings.
Deputy Speaker, can I just agree with colleagues that Sir David Amess's kindness did not know party boundaries, and I in particular reflect that he found himself in a place of unexpected and certainly unsought popularity in the SNP group in 2015, when as a group of new MPs it turned out that barely any member had not received a kind word, a little bit of advice, or certainly some directions from Sir David in those opening weeks. And he was remembered kindly by everybody in our group, given it was a group of newbies at the time. So I'd like to put that on the record and give my thoughts to his family. In terms of the statement, I'd like to thank the Security Minister. Could he set out how ongoing assessment of the efficiency of Prevent Channel will be undertaken going forward? And also, does he feel that he has the full cooperation of social media companies in particular in taking forward his work going forward? Thank you.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable member for his points and for his reflections on Sir David. I think he makes an important point, and in terms of the mechanism that the government will use moving forward, clearly there is the public inquiry, and that will provide a very important forum to ensure that the lessons that have been identified and further lessons no doubt that will be identified will be properly actioned and will be properly implemented. In advance of that, as I think he will be aware, we've also commissioned Lord Anderson to look at these matters. I think he will acknowledge, as other members will, that Lord Anderson is precisely the right person, independent of government, with previous experience as an independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, as a recognised legal mind with credibility and authority in this field, and a member of the other place. And we want to work collaboratively with him to ensure that we can satisfy ourselves and therefore members across this House and people right around the country that the mechanisms are in place are fit for purpose. That is a very significant priority for the government, and I can give him an assurance that we will not rest until the processes that are in place are fit for purpose.
Luke Meyer.
Deputy Speaker, and I associate myself with the comments from both sides of the House about Sir David Amess. One of the challenges with addressing Islamist extremism is the proliferation of hate preachers around the world, both online and in person. And I'm very concerned about the prospect of the preacher Mohammed Hoblos visiting Middlesbrough later this month. I wonder if the Minister can set out the steps he will be taking with regards to this specific case and also the broader actions he will be taking to address hate preachers around the world.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to the honourable member for raising this. I know that he will understand that I am somewhat limited in terms of what I can say. But what I can tell him is that the United Kingdom has a range of disruptive immigration measures at our disposal to refuse entry and cancel permission if it is assessed that a foreign national's presence in the UK is not conducive to the public good. But what I can do is give him assurance today that we'll look carefully at the circumstances that he has helpfully raised.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can thank the Minister very much for his words. I don't think there's any of us in the Chamber who knew Sir David, or privy to know Sir David, would not be mindful of his goodness that he had, but also of his faith, and he and I shared the same faith. As a nation blighted by terrorism and action by evil people who believe that they have the right to take life, it is clear that these powers to address the people must be accessible by intelligence services, and funding to suit must follow appropriately. The accident resulted in the death of Sir David Amess. Indeed, those three precious little girls were shocking, and it was clear that there was not enough support for the Prevent programme, and indeed it failed, and we all acknowledge that. We're not saying that in an objectional way, we're saying it in a factual way, evidential way, and that's the point we want to make. I'm hoping that things will change, and I think that's what we're all looking for, so that our UK citizens are safe from known suspects. How can government ensure that public officials and staff who we have as MPs have a responsibility to look after as well are safe in our places of business, ever remembering, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we must be accessible, and we will be accessible to our constituents who elected us to this place. Thank you so much.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I'm very grateful to him, as I always am. Both he and Sir David were and are true champions of this place, and I know the House is grateful to him for the important and constructive contributions that he always makes, and his interest and experience of terrorism is well known and long-standing. I think he makes a very important point about accessibility, because all of us as constituency MPs rightly will want to get out and meet with our constituents and make sure that they feel as if we are accessible to them. So there is, on occasion, a balance to be struck in terms of ensuring that we are able to perform our functions and duty at a local level without fear or favour, whilst at the same time ensuring that activity that we take place locally and nationally is as safe and secure as it possibly can be. I can give him an absolute assurance that these are matters that we attach the most profound importance to. We're working very closely with Mr. Speaker and the work that he's doing on the Speakers' Conference, and I can give him an assurance of the priority that we attach to this important work.
Chris Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a new member, I sadly never knew Sir David Amess, but from what people have said about his dedication to his constituents and his good humour across the House, I think he's a model for all new members to follow. At the Home Affairs Committee last week, we heard from the Permanent Secretary about how Prevent is changing and how the terror threat is changing. And as we can see from the learning review, there are clearly gaps and lessons that still need to be learned. That requires independent scrutiny and independent oversight. So can the Minister tell us a bit about how the new Prevent Commissioner will be able to provide the scrutiny that we need?
I'm very grateful to him, and I completely agree with his characterisation of Sir David as being a model for all members. He's absolutely right about that. I think he raises a very important point, and I completely agree with his assessment of the learning review. It did identify a number of gaps, and those are gaps that will have to be closed. I think, and he will understand what I mean by this, I need to be careful not to seek to provide too much direction and guidance to the independent Prevent Commissioner, not least because, knowing Lord Anderson, I don't think he would take too kindly to that. What I am completely confident in is that Lord Anderson has all of the requisite skills and experience and credibility to provide this function. He's an outstanding appointment. The Home Secretary and I look forward to working very closely with him. But further to the work that he will be seeking to do, I can also give him and the House an assurance that, as I've said previously, we will leave no stone unturned to make sure that we do what needs to be done to ensure that Prevent is fit for purpose, provides the confidence that people rightly will want.
And the final question on the statement, Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as we have heard today and previously in this place from so many of the honourable members across both sides of the benches, Sir David was a loved and valued colleague, not just an MP, but a man with family and friends, whom sadly I did not have the privilege of working with in this place. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that Sir David's killer exited the Prevent scheme many years before the attack took place. And whilst future actions, tragically, are too late for Sir David and his family, what steps are being taken to ensure that other, and indeed all relevant agencies along the lines, don't just learn but act on the lessons from the killer's ability to evade detection in the period leading up to his attack?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I'm very grateful to her, and I completely agree with the points that she made, and she's right to highlight the difference between actually learning lessons and implementing and acting upon them. And I can give her an assurance through the processes that were announced previously and again today that we have got the mechanisms to do that. That said, and as I referenced earlier, we will continue to have conversations with the Amos family and with others to look at where there are areas where we might want to do more, and I'm wanting to have those conversations sooner rather than later. I think my final word, Madam Deputy Speaker, is I'm sure on behalf of the whole House, is to reiterate a collective tribute to Sir Davis. He was an outstanding parliamentarian. He is greatly missed, and we will never forget him.
That concludes the statement.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Point of order, Alan Mack.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, Hansard will confirm that at Department for Science, Innovation and Technology oral questions earlier today, the Secretary of State, who is in his place, said that no Conservative ministers had met AstraZeneca representatives following the announcement of their £450 million investment to expand their Merseyside vaccine facility. The Secretary of State is wrong. Publicly available transparency data from the Treasury and the Secretary of State's own department confirms that meetings did take place between AstraZeneca and my right honourable friend, the member for Godalming and Ash, then the Chancellor, and my honourable friend, the member for Arundel and South Downs. Madam Deputy Speaker, I seek your advice on what to do, and can I offer the Secretary of State, who is in his place, the opportunity to apologise and correct the record for the House?
I thank the honourable member for his point of order and for notice of it. I trust that he has notified the Secretary of State of his intention to raise the point. Should the Minister feel that the record needs to be corrected, there are processes by which he may do so. The honourable gentleman has put his point on the record. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Why detain the House? Why don't I just apologise now and correct the record? The information, I'm grateful for being alerted to it. I'm happy to correct the record, and I'm happy to apologise to the honourable member for saying so earlier. I should also correct the thrust of my argument this morning, which was there was insouciance in the period of time between the March statement and the general election in July. Actually, it wasn't insouciance, it was just incompetence that meant they couldn't get the deal across the line.
I thank the Secretary of State. We now move to the 10-minute rule motion. 10-minute rule motion. Manuela Pertigala.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about a cap on political donations, to make provision for a review to recommend the level at which such a cap should be set, and to consider the impact of such a cap, to make provision about political donations made by foreign nationals through companies and for connected purposes. This is a bill that will take big money out of British politics, protect our democracy from foreign interference, and restore public trust in our electoral system. For too long, our politics have been exposed. It is far too easy for those who do not have the national interests of our country at heart, who have made their wealth through illicit means, to funnel money into British politics. This bill is simple in its aims, to ensure that it is the people of this country, not the deep pockets of foreign billionaires, oligarchs or corporate interests, who decide our country's future in elections and referendums. Madam Deputy Speaker, trust in our political system is faltering. Many people look at our politics and they see a system rigged in favour of the rich and powerful. A recent poll by YouGov found that over 2/3 of the British public supports a limit on political donations. Not-for-profit organisations such as Unlock Democracy, Spotlight on Corruption and Fair Vote recommend swift action to tighten electoral finance legislation or else risk democratic backsliding. The message is clear. People want change. We want big money kicked out of politics. Yet, under our current system, there is no limit on what a single individual or business can donate. This is not democracy. This is a bidding war for influence, ripe for exploitation by oligarchs and foreign billionaires. Look at the mess this has resulted in. Just over a month ago, people across Britain recoiled in horror to read the news that US billionaire Elon Musk planned to donate an uncapped amount of money to reform. If he were to follow through on this plan, we would be powerless to stop him. And most alarming were past donations to the Conservative Party by individuals linked to the Russian government. This isn't just about fairness, it's about national security. Britain has long prided itself on being a beacon of democracy, but we must not be complacent. Our political financial regulations have glaring loopholes that are open for exploitation by foreign money, funneled through UK-registered companies, opaque financial networks, and questionable donors. Malign actors who do not share our values of tolerance, liberty, and the rule of law should not have unrestricted access to our democracy. We know that hostile states seek to undermine democracies all the time. We have seen it in cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. Yet, our political finance laws remain riddled with loopholes that allow foreign and dark money to shape British politics. This bill seeks to close those gaps, ensuring that our elections and referendums belong to the voters, not foreign interests. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill seeks to deliver two fair, necessary and overdue changes. First, it will introduce a fair cap on political donations as determined by a review. Second, it will close British politics to the influence of foreign money by preventing foreign donors from funding our politics. These are essential measures that must be brought into effect. We must protect our elections from manipulation and ensure further transparency in political funding. In doing so, we will help us to restore faith in our democracy and introduce vital safeguards for our political institutions. There is already a consensus in this House that foreign donations have no place in British politics, but there are gaps in the law that allow this to happen. We must act now to close the legal loopholes that allow them to flow unchecked. We in this House have a responsibility to uphold the integrity of our democracy. It is our duty to drive the change our country needs. Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain has always been a nation that stands for fairness, democracy and integrity. It is time we take a firm stand against undue influence in our politics and ensure that our democracy serves the people. This bill is not radical. It is reasonable, necessary and long overdue. It will ensure that political influence isn't bought, but earned through genuine public support. Introducing a cap on political donations isn't about limiting participation. It's about making sure that every vote, every voice, and every citizen matters equally in our political system. Let us give back control of British politics to our constituents, not to unaccountable tech billionaires or those who seek to buy influence. Let us renew our commitment to an open and fair democracy, one that belongs to the people of this country, now and for generations to come. Thank you.
The question is that the Honourable Member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Thank you. Dr. Rose Savage, Ellie Chowns, Liz Jarvis, Socha Eastwood, James McCleary, Claire Young, Mr. Alistair Carmichael, Vera Hobhouse, Sarah Olney, Martin Wrigley, and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Manuela Pertigala.
Political Donations Bill.
Second reading what day?
16th of May.
The 16th of May. The Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Data Use and Access Bill, Lords, second reading. Now.
Minister to move second reading. Secretary of State Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government is using technology to grow the economy and create new jobs. To empower citizens and deliver a smaller, smarter state. But without data, none of that is possible. Successive governments have failed to set out the extraordinary opportunity that data presents. Our citizens have counted the cost in slower growth, fewer jobs, and flatlining productivity. In communities that feel less safe because police officers are spending more time filling in forms and less time out there on the streets where we need them. Or hospitals where patients are left waiting longer for the care that they so desperately need. And when they are queuing up to register for the death of a loved one or struggling to rent new homes with decades-old documents just to prove their identity. An outdated approach to data is holding Britain's economy back. This bill will take the brakes off, unleashing a new era of wealth and opportunity for all. The smart data measures in this bill... I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm most grateful to the Secretary of State. He says that successive governments failed to act, but isn't it the case that this bill is almost an identical one to the one which the last Conservative government introduced and which very nearly made it onto the statute book?
I'm very grateful for the Honourable Gentleman for pointing that out. Indeed, a lot of this bill is the one that his government introduced. It is also the one that they called a general election that called it in its halted it in its tracks. It's also the bill that we offered to get it through in wash-up should the opportunity be presented by the government, which was turned down by the government. So we are here today discussing a bill which his government could well have got through. Of course, they had 14 years before that period to get it through as well. So I'm grateful for him to point that out, and I'm very grateful, no doubt, for him supporting a bill for which he claims so much credit for. The smart data measures in the bill could make switching energy suppliers as quick and easy as switching your bank account. Consumers will be able to compare utility prices and find better deals to put their money into their pockets. Businesses will be forced to innovate and improve their services too. Fast-growing firms will also benefit from the digital verification services that this bill enables. Today, people spend months waiting to get paperwork sorted for a new job. By helping people prove who they are without physical documents, we'll cut the time it takes to get on the payroll and give businesses the freedom to get on with growth. One of the biggest barriers to growth are the appalling state of Britain's crumbling infrastructure. Today, streets are being endlessly dug up and redug up by different firms repairing gas one year and water the next. At the same time, bigger infrastructure projects have stalled, falling silent for years, offering a complete, accurate picture of the underground infrastructure. The National Underground Asset Register will strengthen Britain's building bureaucracy. It will cut the time it takes for workers to get on site, to get the data they need, from 6 days to 6 seconds. That means that they'll be able to get on with building the roads, railways and homes that Britain so desperately needs. Today, a siloed approach to data is slowing the state down. Patients are put through the same tests again and again, or one prescription error means that they get the wrong medication. This is simply unacceptable. The NHS has one of the deepest, most diverse data sets in the world, but the people who need that data cannot access it. By introducing mandatory information standards for all IT suppliers, this bill will ensure that information can run safely, securely and seamlessly through the healthcare system. I'll give way.
I wondered if he could outline what benefits this bill will have to my constituency in Harlow. I'm thinking particularly of those residents who do have multiple prescriptions and struggle to get the data that they need so quickly to their fingertips.
Very grateful for his intervention, and of course he's there championing his constituents, and I'm pleased to inform him that just as the section of the speech that I'm turning to now, the bill will deliver a much more streamlined access to the healthcare system throughout, whether it's primary care right the way through to hospitals, where information should flow freely. And because of this bill, not just the incentives being put in place, but the actual requirements too. And of course, when they're travelling to their GP or they're travelling to their hospital, they can count on far less interruptions on the pavements and in the streets, taking them there simply because of the underground asset register, which will make sure that there's far less disruption in the streets on the way as well. And that's just two examples of how this bill introduced by this government will benefit his constituents. It will make it easier to introduce transformative new technologies like AI. It will reduce duplication and error, save our doctors and nurses time so they can focus on the patients who need them the most. The same goes for police officers keeping our country safe. The measures proposed in this bill will save them 1.5 million hours every single year. Engaging with the state today takes time and it takes effort. I see no reason why it should. I created the new government digital service to deliver efficient, convenient, digital public services that are shaped around citizens' lives. This bill will bolster those efforts, and I give way.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. Open banking benefits 12 million customers every year by allowing them access to their data. It's been a great success. Does he see that as a model by which citizens can access their data held by the state?
I'm very grateful for his comments. Of course, smart data underpins the service that he refers to. We see boundless opportunities for smart data to be applied in new ways, and I think the bill here before us will unlock some of those opportunities, and I'm grateful for him getting it onto the record. An electronic register of births and deaths, for example, will make life that little bit easier for a new parent or those who have lost a loved one. However, I will give way.
Thank you, for that, and thank you, Secretary of State. Some of my constituents have raised some concerns around how their information will be kept safely with the registers and births and deaths online. Will you be able to ensure how the government will do that?
I'm very grateful. Of course, when we are using data, it is absolutely imperative that we reassure the public and people up and down the country that their data will be used safely, wisely, and that they will always remain in control of how their data is used. I can give her those reassurances. You'll notice that this is a government that has also acted with transparency when it comes to informing the public how data and how algorithms which process the data are being used. This government is releasing, and just last week I released more algorithms so they could be undertaken by public scrutiny into the algorithm playbook for which we have released, and you will see increasingly government department to government department more of those algorithms being made available as our resources allows. Just one example of how we are using transparency to earn the trust this public deserve. But just to point out, in the previous year before the general election, just one government department in the previous department released an algorithm for public scrutiny. I give way.
I'm extremely grateful for giving way. There is a great deal in this bill that will cause us all to support, but there are also some difficult concepts lurking within it, as I know he will recognise. He's talking about transparency when it comes to data. One of the issues of concern is around precisely what we mean by scientific research on which data may be employed, and precisely what we mean by the public interest which requires to be served by that scientific research. Can I simply ask him this? We won't do this at second reading, but can I ask him to commit to a proper examination of those concepts as we move forward with this bill, so that we all understand what we mean and the public can get the reassurance that he's describing?
I'm very grateful for the Right Honourable Gentleman's informed intervention. I can assure him that we take this issue very seriously. I can also assure him that when it comes to committee stage, these are one of the issues that we will go into in considerable depth, and I'm sure that his whips are hearing of his interest for getting onto the Bill Committee. Because of his interest in such matters, he's clearly volunteering to put the hard yards in to making sure that we get it right on behalf of the House. However, none of the issues that I've outlined will succeed without trust. People won't use technology unless they are confident that it is being used safely. But we often lack the rigorous evidence that we need to take decisions about the safety and of our rapidly changing online world. The provisions in this bill will allow researchers to access data held by platforms, enabling them to conduct robust, independent research into online safety. I am grateful to peers for their dedication to rigorously scrutinising these measures. We have listened closely. In response, we have made some important changes to this legislation. First, we have brought forward measures to strengthen data protection for children. Information society service providers likely to be accessed by children will now have clear legal duties to consider how best to proceed and to protect and support children when designing their data processing activities. Second, we have added a provision to help charities use email to engage with people who have previously supported their charitable purposes. Third, we have committed to making it easier for people to navigate data protection measures in a world transformed by technology. In two rapidly growing sectors, automated decision-making and EdTech, we will ask the ICO to publish codes of practice which give people the knowledge and the confidence they need to legally use personal data. Of course I will.
I thank the Secretary for giving way. He'll be aware that Clause 80 of the bill removes the existing right of individuals not to be subjected to solely automated decision-making processes unless it involves a category of special data. But in practice, this might mean that journalists can have their data processed in an ADM, which poses significant risks to their sources. What reassurance can the Secretary give that as this bill passes through the House, these concerns will be explored and assessed?
I'm very grateful. Of course, the bill improves the automated decision-making process, But there will be individual attributes and sectors that will be impacted by this, and of course we will take that into consideration during the committee stage. That particular issue, I'm sure, will be raised there, and I'm grateful for her getting it on a record during second reading. Peers also added in several measures during the bill's report stage. First, Baroness Owen ran an admiral campaign to outlaw the creation of intimate images and deepfakes. This horrific form of online abuse has a devastating impact on its victims. The government will work with Baroness Owen to ensure that the drafting of intimate image abuse measures at the committee stage protects women and girls and keeps them safe. Second, my ministers will work with members of the opposition to explore the possibility of a new security guidelines for users of the National Underground Asset Register as proposed by Viscount Camrose. I am confident that we will find a solution that is satisfactory to all. Third, Viscount Colville added a public interest test for scientific researchers seeking to use Clause 67 to process personal data. But expecting scientists to define the outcomes of their work in advance goes against the unpredictable nature of research. Many groundbreaking discoveries come from research with no clear public benefits from the very start. The mRNA-based vaccines that saved millions of lives during the COVID-19 pandemic drew on curiosity-driven research that for years had no practical applications. Today's AI revolution draws on decades-old neural network research, long thought unimportant. As the Royal Society have said, this additional public interest requirement would make an undue bureaucratic burden on researchers. For these reasons, it is something which we will seek to overturn. Fourth, many members will have observed Baroness Kidron's campaign on AI and copyright with very keen interest. One of the extraordinary things about Britain is our ability to support cutting-edge AI sector with world-leading creative industries at the very same time. Both are fundamental to our future prosperity and our standing in the world. I refuse to choose between them. I will finish the section and I'll give way on to those people who have considerable interest in this. But let me say what I have to say and then hear what honourable members would like to contribute. And of course, I'll engage in as fulsome way as I possibly can. The final framework must reward human creativity and incentivise innovation and promote the certainty required for long-term growth in both sectors. But the importance and the complexity of this issue means that it should be considered through the live consultation. And as I've said in that consultation, legislation is ultimately likely to be needed. Of course I'll give way, and then...
Of course the creative industries are very excited about the inclusion of which are new clauses 135 to 139, and they see this very much as their guarantee and their protection against the ravages of generative artificial intelligence. They're in the bill. They protect our creative industries. Will he say to the House today that he will respect them and he will keep them in the bill and have no attempt to water them down?
I'm grateful for his intervention, and certainly I pay tribute to those from the creative arts sector who are in the House and in the building